The wind didn't scream that night. It waited, low, heavy, watching a small town that believed storms only came once in a lifetime. One man stood on a rise outside Dodge City, Kansas, listening to the sky instead of running from it. They laughed at his strange shelter. They called it useless. By morning, it would be the only thing still standing. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Dodge City, Kansas sat exposed on the plains, a town built in straight lines under a sky that never stayed still. The land was flat and open, offering no protection from wind that moved freely across it, carrying dust, grit, and sudden shifts in temperature. In late March, the weather changed without warning. Mornings were cold enough to stiffen fingers, afternoons warmed just enough to loosen the soil, and evenings dropped fast into sharp, restless chill. The wind pressed against buildings as if testing them, rattling signs and pushing dust down the streets. People here didn't talk much about the weather. They worked around it and learned to expect very little mercy from it. Calder Wren arrived on a day when the wind refused to settle. It came from behind him, then slipped around to his side, tugging at his coat as he rode into town. He was 33, tall and lean, with the build of a man shaped by years of riding and physical work rather than deliberate training. His posture was straight, his movements efficient. His face was angular, sun-darkened, with a short, uneven beard and eyes that held a muted gray-green tone. Those eyes were alert but reserved, the kind that studied before deciding. A thin scar cut along the edge of his right eyebrow, old and faded. He wore an aging hat with a curved brim, a plain canvas coat, and boots worn down by long miles in the saddle. His horse, a bay mare named Morrow, was well past her prime. Her coat had faded unevenly, her joints thickened with age, but she moved with steady care. Calder handled her gently, reins loose, hand resting easily against her neck. They traveled like two who understood each other without needing correction. At the edge of town stood the livery stable, low and weathered. Silas Grady stepped out as Calder approached. Silas was broad and thick-set, close to 60, with iron-gray hair and a heavy mustache. His hands were darkened by years of leather and oil. His eyes were sharp, practiced, and careful. "Passing through?" Silas asked. "Maybe," Calder said, sliding down from the saddle. Silas looked over Calder's gear, pausing briefly at the narrow wooden crate secured behind the saddle. "You got money?" "Enough." Silas grunted and took the reins. Morrow didn't resist. Inside, the stable smelled of hay, manure, and old wood. Horses shifted in their stalls. Calder set his crate near a post and removed a small leather notebook from inside his coat, checked it, then returned it to his pocket. "You read?" Silas asked. "When it matters," Calder replied. Silas snorted, amused. "Name's Silas. Calder Wren." "Wren?" Silas repeated. "Small bird." "My mother liked the contrast," Calder said. Silas nodded and went back to work. Calder stepped into the street. Dodge City moved around him in its usual way, wagons creaking, voices calling out, doors opening and closing with hard final sounds. Most of the buildings were square and solid, pressed into straight angles as if daring the plains to challenge them. Calder studied them quietly, tracing rooflines and corners with his eyes. Beyond the main street lay a patch of open ground on a slight rise. Sparse grass clung to dry soil and a broken fence leaned at an angle. Calder walked toward it, boots sinking lightly into loose dirt. The wind shifted again, circling him. He stopped near the center of the rise and stood still. He closed his eyes and listened, not just to sound, but to movement and pressure. The wind flowed in layers, redirected by the ground, never striking the same way twice. A boy passing by slowed to watch. He was small, freckled, no more than 10. "What are you doing?" the boy asked. "Listening," Calder said. "To what?" "What comes next?" The boy followed Calder's gaze toward the empty horizon, then shrugged. "Looks like nothing," he said, and ran off. The next morning, Calder returned with tools. He didn't start with walls. He started by marking a circle in the dirt, measuring carefully with rope. He gathered materials others had discarded, bent metal, old wagon hoops, curved timber that refused to lie straight. He paid quietly, traded where needed, Stakes went into the ground at even distances. Arch supports followed, rising and bending back toward the earth. The structure grew slowly, deliberate in its shape. By midday, people had gathered to watch. They stood at a distance, arms folded, faces curious or doubtful. "What's he building?" someone asked. "Looks like a shell," another answered. Calder didn't respond. He worked steadily. A man named Lyle Maddox approached. Lyle was lean, neatly dressed, with a confident smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's an odd shape," he said. "Most folks build square." "Most folks build what they know," Calder replied. Lyle laughed lightly. "Hope it holds," he said, and walked off. Children circled later, whispering among themselves. One called it the wind shell. The name stuck. That night, Calder lay on a narrow cot in the back of the stable. Under lantern light, he opened his notebook. Its pages were filled with diagrams, pressure lines, notes written in tight script. Near the center was a single line written in older handwriting: "Build as if the sky is honest about what it can do." Calder closed the notebook and listened as the wind pressed against the walls. Dodge City slept inside its square buildings, confident and unaware. On the rise beyond town, the curved ribs of Calder's structure stood quiet in the dark, waiting. By the third morning, Dodge City had accepted Calder Wren as a presence, if not yet as a purpose. He was no longer a novelty riding in from nowhere, but a man who rose early, worked steadily, and didn't explain himself unless asked. That alone set him apart. In a town where men often announced who they were before proving it, Calder let his hands speak first. The wind had shifted overnight. It no longer pushed in erratic bursts, but moved in long, sustained pulls, dragging dust across the open ground in low sheets. Calder stood on the rise just after sunrise, boots planted wide for balance, studying the half-formed structure. The curved ribs rose from the ground like the beginnings of a rib cage, evenly spaced, their arcs consistent. He walked the perimeter slowly, checking alignment by eye rather than tool, adjusting one support with a careful nudge of his shoulder. The structure wasn't large yet, but its intent was clear. It didn't resist the open land around it. It belonged to it. Morrow grazed nearby, head low, chewing with the patience of an animal that had learned there was no advantage in haste. Calder kept her close, not out of worry but habit. She was 14, maybe 15, older than most working horses in the area, and he trusted her instincts. She lifted her head occasionally, ears turning toward distant sounds Calder hadn't yet noticed. When she did, he paused and listened too. By mid-morning, Silas Grady arrived with a wheelbarrow and a coil of old iron straps. He didn't announce himself. He simply set the barrow down and leaned on its handles, watching Calder work for a while before speaking. "You're wasting less material than I thought you would," Silas said. Calder glanced over. "Straight pieces don't get thrown away for being bad," he replied. "They get thrown away for not fitting someone else's plan." Silas nodded, as if filing the comment away. He wore the same work clothes as before, dark vest, rolled sleeves, but there was a new set to his shoulders. He wasn't here as an observer this time. He handed Calder the straps without ceremony. "Thought these might help. They used to hold a grain chute together, strong enough." Calder took them, weighing the metal in his hands. "Appreciate it." Silas shrugged. "I'm curious, not convinced." "That's fair." As the sun climbed, others' eyes wandered over. Not a crowd exactly, but a rotation of interest. Men paused on their way to work, watched for a minute, then moved on. A few stayed longer, asking questions that were half genuine and half testing. Calder answered only what was necessary. He explained measurements, load paths, how the ribs would tie together at the crown. He didn't mention wind. Not yet. Late in the morning, a woman approached from the direction of town. She walked with steady confidence, apron folded neatly at her waist, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Her hair was dark brown, streaked faintly with gray, pulled back into a practical knot. She was in her early 40s, tall and slim without being fragile, her posture upright in a way that suggested long hours on her feet. Her face held fine lines at the corners of her eyes, earned rather than regretted, and her gaze was direct. This was Etta Bloom, owner of the bakery on Main Street. The town knew her as reliable, reserved, and quietly observant. She had come to Dodge City 10 years earlier as a widow, carrying grief she never discussed and a determination that didn't waver. People respected her because she didn't ask for sympathy and didn't offer empty kindness. She stopped a few steps from the edge of the rise. "You're the man building the round thing," she said, not accusing, just stating fact. Calder wiped his hands on his trousers. "Seems so." She studied the frame, head tilted slightly. "Doesn't look temporary." "It's not. Most men who plan to leave don't build," she said. Calder met her gaze. "Most men who plan to stay build what they've already seen." That earned a faint, brief smile. "You planning to sell bread from it?" she asked dryly. "No," Calder said. "But if the roof holds, I might trade you shelter for a loaf sometime." Etta considered that. "I'll remember that," she said, and turned back toward town. The day passed without incident, but by afternoon the wind sharpened. It came lower, colder, scraping across the ground. Calder adjusted his work, reinforcing joints sooner than planned, tying ribs together with cross-bracing that would later be removed. He moved with urgency that wasn't panic, but anticipation. A dog appeared sometime near dusk. Calder noticed it because Morrow did. The mare lifted her head, ears forward, and snorted softly. The dog was medium-sized, lean, with a rough brown and white coat and one ear that refused to stand straight. He moved cautiously, circling the structure at a distance before sitting down to watch. His ribs showed faintly beneath his fur, and one back leg carried an old limp that had healed wrong. Calder crouched and held out a hand. The dog didn't approach, but he didn't retreat either. He watched Calder with steady amber eyes, head cocked slightly. "You lost?" Calder asked. The dog's tail thumped once against the dirt. "Or did you decide to stay?" The dog stood, limped forward, and sniffed Calder's fingers. He smelled of dust and old grass and something stubborn. Calder scratched behind the dog's good ear. "Guess that answers it." The dog lay down near the structure, close enough to be part of it, far enough to leave himself an exit. Calder didn't name him yet. Names, like promises, were better given when they were certain. That night, the wind rose hard after sunset. Not a storm, but enough to unsettle. Shutters banged in town. Loose boards rattled. Calder slept lightly on his cot at the stable, waking once when Morrow shifted restlessly in her stall. He listened until her breathing slowed again. By morning, the wind had left its mark. Dust had piled against the ribs of the structure, drifting naturally around the curves instead of stacking. Calder noticed immediately. He brushed some of it away, studying the patterns. The wind hadn't fought the shape. It had accepted it. Lyle Maddox arrived late, boots polished, hat clean, expression sour. He stopped short when he saw how far the structure had progressed. "You working faster than I expected," he said. "Wind doesn't wait," Calder replied. Lyle scoffed. "Neither do debts. You paying for all this?" Calder straightened. "I am." "With what?" "With time," Calder said evenly. "And attention." Lyle laughed without humor. "Neither of those buy lumber." "They buy survival," Calder said. That shut Lyle up, if only briefly. He walked away shaking his head. As the days passed, the structure grew. The ribs met at the crown. Calder installed a circular compression ring, securing each support with careful precision. Silas helped more often now, offering tools, holding support steady. He didn't comment much, but he watched closely, learning without admitting it. Etta returned once with a small bundle wrapped in cloth, bread and dried apples. She didn't linger. She left the food on a flat stone and nodded once before leaving. Calder ate slowly, aware of the quiet significance of the gesture. On the fourth evening, clouds gathered low and fast. Not storm clouds yet, but dense and unsettled. Morrow grew restless. The dog paced, tail low. Calder stood beneath the growing frame and felt the pressure change in the air. It wasn't fear that tightened his chest, it was recognition. "Soon," he said quietly, to no one in particular. The wind answered with a long, steady pull across the prairie. The pressure change, Calder sensed. The night before did not break into a storm. It settled instead, heavy and persistent, as if the sky had lowered itself a few feet closer to the ground. Morning arrived dim and colorless. Clouds stretched thin but unbroken, the sun reduced to a pale disk that gave light without warmth. The wind slowed, not calm but restrained, moving with a deliberate patience that Calder trusted even less than sudden force. It was the kind of weather that made men uneasy without knowing why. Calder rose before first light and walked the perimeter of the structure. The curved frame now stood complete, its ribs joined cleanly at the crown, the compression ring holding steady under its own weight. He ran his hands along the joints, feeling for give, listening for the small complaints wood and metal made before they failed. There were none. The shape held. It always did, when the balance was right. Morrow stood a short distance away. Head lifted, nostrils flaring. She shifted her weight more often than usual, hooves pressing into the dirt and releasing again. Calder noticed and adjusted his pace to match her unease. Animals sense change without translating it into words. He trusted that. The dog slept near the base of the frame, curled tight against the ground. In daylight, Calder could see him more clearly. He was older than Calder had first thought, maybe 8 or 9 years, muzzle beginning to gray. The limp in his back leg was permanent, not painful anymore, but limiting. His coat was coarse and uneven, with a scar running along his flank where fur refused to grow back. The dog lifted his head when Calder passed, eyes alert, then settled again. He had chosen this place, and choice mattered. By mid-morning, Silas arrived with a sack of nails and a length of rope. He moved slower today, stiffness in his knees more pronounced. "Weather's wrong," he said without greeting. Calder nodded. "Feels like it's waiting." Silas squinted at the sky. "I've seen this before. Not here. Down south. Year I lost my brother." He stopped himself there, jaw tightening. Silas wasn't a man who shared easily. Whatever that memory held, it had shaped the way he watched the sky now, with respect edged by resentment. They worked together in silence for a time, attaching temporary braces to prepare for the next phase. Calder planned to begin skinning the structure soon, fitting curved panels one by one. He wasn't rushing, but he wasn't delaying either. Near noon, another man approached the rise. He walked carefully, measuring his steps, carrying a leather case under one arm. He was tall but narrow, shoulders sloping slightly forward, as if the weight he carried wasn't physical. His hair was sandy blonde, thinning at the crown, and his beard was trimmed close to his face, neat to the point of habit. Wire-rimmed spectacles sat low on his nose. He wore a clean but worn coat and boots polished more by attention than use. This was Henry Caldwell, the county surveyor. Dodge City tolerated him more than it liked him. He was known for rules, for lines drawn on maps that didn't always match the way land wanted to behave. He stopped a respectful distance from the structure and watched Calder work for several minutes before speaking. "You're building outside the standard plots," Caldwell said. Calder set down his tool. "I'm not interfering with any." "That's true," Caldwell admitted. "But I need to know what this is meant to be." "A building," Calder said. Caldwell adjusted his glasses. "Purpose?" "Shelter." "Commercial?" "No." "Permanent?" Calder met his gaze. "As long as it stands." Caldwell studied the curved frame, his eyes following lines that refused to meet at right angles. "You're aware there are no codes for this?" "There weren't codes for most things once," Calder replied. That gave Caldwell pause. He opened his case and removed a folded map, more out of habit than necessity. "I'll need to note it," he said. "Unconventional structures draw attention." "So does surviving," Calder said quietly. Caldwell closed the case. He hesitated, then nodded once. "I won't stop you," he said, "but I'll be watching." After he left, Silas exhaled sharply. "That man's got a way of making weather feel personal." "He's doing his job," Calder said. "So are you," Silas replied. The afternoon brought a visitor Calder did not expect. A man on horseback approached from the western road, riding hard. He was broad-chested, with a thick black beard and hair pulled back at the nape of his neck. His coat was dust-stained, his hat battered. When he dismounted, he moved stiffly, favoring one shoulder. His name was Amos Klein, though Calder wouldn't learn that until later. Amos had the look of a man shaped by loss and stubborn survival. His beard was untrimmed, streaked with gray, though he couldn't have been much older than 45. His eyes were dark and restless, scanning the structure with open skepticism. "You the one building this?" Amos asked, voice rough. "I am." Amos walked a slow circle around the frame. "Looks like a mistake." "Most things do before they work," Calder said. Amos stopped short. "My barn went down last spring," he said. Straight walls, new beams. Wind took it apart like it was nothing. His jaw clenched. I lost 3 horses. Silence followed. Calder didn't fill it. I heard you were building something different, Amos continued. Thought I'd see it myself. Calder nodded. You're seeing it. Amos studied the joints, the curve of the ribs. He reached out and pressed his palm against one support, as if testing its resolve. You think this would hold? I think it wouldn't fight, Calder said. That matters. Amos considered that longer than most would have. If you're wrong, he said finally, you die first. Calder met his eyes. Yes. Amos mounted his horse without another word and rode off. He didn't look back. The wind rose again toward evening, stronger now, tugging at loose clothing and sending dust in low spirals around the base of the structure. Calder watched how it moved, how it slid along the curves and lifted away. The dog rose and repositioned himself, choosing a spot where the ground dipped slightly. Morrow turned her body broadside to the wind, head lowered. Etta Bloom arrived near sunset carrying a small wrapped parcel. She stopped when the wind gusted, bracing herself, then continued. I won't stay, she said. It's not safe to linger. Calder accepted the parcel. Thank you. She looked at the structure again. People are talking, she said. Some think you're tempting trouble. Calder smiled faintly. Trouble doesn't need an invitation. Etta studied his face, searching for something reckless. She didn't find it. Be careful, she said instead, and left. That night, Calder did not sleep at the stable. He unrolled his bedroll beneath the partial shelter of the frame, wanting to feel how it behaved in the wind. The dog lay near his feet. Morrow stood tethered close, restless but obedient. The wind came steady through the night, pressing and releasing, testing without committing. Calder listened, counting the rhythm, feeling the structure respond. It flexed slightly, then returned to shape. No sharp strain, no protest. Just before dawn, the wind eased. Calder lay awake, staring up through the open crown at clouds moving fast and low. He thought of the barn Amos lost, of Silas's brother, of all the square things built with confidence and broken without warning. When morning came, Dodge City looked unchanged, but Calder knew better. The sky had measured them, and it had not finished. The morning after the long night of wind broke clear but uneasy, as if the land itself had not finished deciding what it meant to do. The sky was brighter than it had been in days, pale blue, stretched thin and brittle, and the air carried a dryness that scraped the throat. Calder took that as no relief at all. Sudden clarity often came before trouble. He rose from his bedroll beneath the frame, rolled it tight, and stood for a long moment with his hands resting on his hips, reading the sky the way other men read ledgers. The structure had held through the night exactly as he expected. No loosened joints, no warped ribs. The curves had flexed and returned, patient and unoffended. Morrow had not slept much. She stood with her head angled toward the west, ears flicking back and forth, muscles taut beneath her faded coat. Calder checked her legs and hooves, running practiced hands over old scars and stiff joints. She accepted the attention calmly but did not relax. Animals didn't pretend comfort when it wasn't there. Calder trusted that honesty. The dog rose when Calder did, stretching stiffly, the limp in his hind leg more pronounced in the morning cold. Up close, Calder could see the dog's age more clearly now. The muzzle was graying faster than the rest of him, and one eye carried a faint cloudiness, the kind left by an injury that had healed poorly. Still, the dog moved with purpose. He followed Calder without crowding him, stopping when Calder stopped, watching when Calder watched. Calder filled a tin cup with water and set it on the ground. The dog drank, then sat back on his haunches, tail thumping once. Calder studied him for a moment. You'll need a name, he said quietly. The dog tilted his head, waiting. Calder considered, then nodded to himself. Ridge, he said. The dog didn't react, but he didn't move away either. Calder took that as acceptance. By mid-morning, Calder began skinning the structure. This was the work that would make it look like something permanent, something harder to dismiss. He fitted curved panels carefully, each one measured twice and seated once, fastening them so the surface remained continuous without sharp interruption. The work was slower than erecting a square wall. It demanded patience, attention, and the willingness to undo progress when something didn't align. Calder moved methodically, focused, shutting out the murmur of the town beyond the rise. That murmur grew louder as the day wore on. People stopped pretending they were only curious. They lingered longer now, standing in small groups that spoke in low voices. Calder caught fragments as he worked, words like unnecessary, reckless, tempting fate. Dodge City was not a place that feared danger, but it was a place that resented reminders of vulnerability. Calder's structure, curved and unapologetic, suggested that what they had built for years might not be enough. That suggestion unsettled people. Near midday, Lyle Maddox returned, this time with company. 2 men walked with him, both familiar faces around town, both accustomed to being listened to. One was Edgar Holt, thick through the chest, clean-shaven despite the dust, his hair kept short and precise. He owned a freight business and liked order, especially when it benefited him. The other was Jonah Pierce, older and leaner, his beard long and streaked with white, eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. Jonah had lost a hand years earlier in a machinery accident, and the missing limb had carved caution deep into his character. He was known for thinking long before speaking, which made people listen when he finally did. They stopped a short distance from Calder's work. "You planning to finish that soon?" Lyle asked, tone casual but edged. Calder didn't stop working. "I plan to finish it right." Edgar Holt stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back. He was a man who liked to present himself as reasonable. "People are concerned," he said. "This structure draws attention, makes folks nervous." Calder tightened a fastener, then straightened. "Concern is cheaper than preparation," he said. Jonah Pierce studied the curve of the wall, eyes narrowing slightly. "What exactly are you preparing for?" he asked. Calder met his gaze. "The kind of wind that doesn't ask permission." Lyle scoffed. "We've had wind before." "Yes," Calder said, "and you rebuilt after it." Edgar's mouth tightened. "You're implying we've been doing things wrong." "I'm saying the land hasn't changed," Calder replied. "We just forget what it can do." Silence followed. Jonah shifted his weight, his remaining hand rubbing absently at the stump where the other had been. "Fear spreads faster than storms," he said finally. "People hear talk. They imagine worse." Calder nodded. "Then let them imagine something that stands." That ended the conversation. They left without agreement, but without threats. Calder returned to his work, aware that resistance often looked like reason when it first arrived. That afternoon, Henry Caldwell returned, this time on horseback. He dismounted carefully, boots sinking slightly into the dirt. "Town council wants a word," he said. His voice carried no judgment, only obligation. "They're meeting tonight." Calder wiped his hands. "About me?" "About what you represent," Caldwell corrected. He hesitated, then added, "You don't have to come, but not coming will be read a certain way." Calder considered the half-skinned structure, the sky above it, the wind that had not yet spoken its loudest. "I'll come," he said. The meeting took place in the back room of the trading post, a long table lit by oil lamps that cast uneven shadows. The room smelled of tobacco and old wood. Calder stood while others sat, not out of defiance but because there were no empty chairs left, faces turned toward him, some curious, some guarded. Edgar Holt spoke. First, laying out concerns in measured language, unproven designs, public safety, setting precedent. Others followed, each adding a layer of worry disguised as practicality. Calder listened without interruption. When it was his turn, he spoke simply. "I'm not asking anyone to copy what I'm building," he said. "I'm not tearing down what you already have. I'm building one structure, on my own land, with my own hands." "And if it fails?" someone asked. "Then I pay the price," Calder replied. "As every builder does." Jonah Pierce leaned forward. "And if it doesn't?" Calder met his gaze. "Then you'll have learned something without losing anything." The room fell quiet. No vote was taken, no decision announced. Calder left with nothing settled, but nothing stopped. That night, the sky changed again. Clouds rose fast from the west, tall and layered, their edges sharp and unnatural. The air grew thick, heavy with the smell of rain that had not yet fallen. Calder returned to the rise before dark, checking every fastener, every seam. He secured tools, tightened braces, and positioned weighted anchors at the base. Silas arrived without being asked, bringing extra rope. Etta appeared briefly, silent, her expression tight, then left to shutter her shop. Ridge paced, uneasy, then settled close to Calder's legs. Morrow stamped and snorted, eyes wide. The wind did not roar. It drew breath. Calder stood beneath the structure and placed a hand against the curved wall. The surface was cool, steady. "All right," he murmured, "not to the building, but to the sky. Show me." As night fell, the first distant thunder rolled low and long. Not overhead. Not yet. The wind shifted direction, then stilled, as if gathering itself. Calder did not move. He stayed where he was under the curve he had trusted from the beginning, knowing that whatever came next would not be imagined any longer. The storm did not arrive the way people expected it to. There was no sudden violence at first, no wall of rain or tearing howl to send Dodge City scrambling for shelter. Instead, the air grew unnaturally still. The wind that had been restless all day withdrew as if called back by something larger, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt deliberate. Calder noticed it immediately. Silence like that was never empty. It was a held breath. The clouds had stacked themselves high by nightfall, towering and layered, their undersides darkened to a heavy green-gray that swallowed the last light of day. The temperature dropped sharply, not with the clean cold of evening, but with a damp chill that clung to skin and clothing. Calder stood beneath the curved shell of the structure, eyes fixed on the western sky, ridge pressed close to his leg, body tense, ears pinned back. Morrow stood tethered a few yards away, head low, muscles quivering beneath her worn coat. She shifted her weight repeatedly, hooves scraping the dirt in short, nervous motions. Calder rested a hand against her neck, feeling the rapid beat of her pulse. "Easy," he murmured. She trusted his voice, if not the sky. The first sound came not from above, but from the ground. A low vibration traveled through the soil, subtle but unmistakable, like the distant rumble of a train far beyond the horizon. Calder felt it through his boots before he heard it clearly. Thunder followed, deep and rolling, not sharp, not close, but persistent. The sky was rearranging itself. In town, lanterns flickered on behind windows, doors shut, shutters were drawn tight. People moved faster than usual, their conversations clipped, unfinished. Edgar Holt's freight yard was already quiet, wagons secured, animals penned. Etta Bloom barred the bakery door earlier than usual, her movements efficient, practiced. She paused once to look toward the rise, her face tight with concern, then turned away. Silas Grady did not go home. He walked toward Calder's structure carrying a coil of rope and a battered lantern, his broad shoulders hunched against a wind that had not yet returned. "You staying?" Silas asked when he reached the rise. "Yes." Silas nodded once. "Then I am too." They worked together quickly, securing the last anchors, tightening lines that had been left loose for adjustment. The structure was nearly complete now, its curved surface continuous, smooth, offering no flat plane for the wind to strike head-on. Calder checked the door last. It was round, thick, fitted carefully into its frame, hinges reinforced to allow movement without strain. He closed it, opened it again, then closed it once more. The motion was clean, uninterrupted. Ridge circled twice before settling just inside the structure, choosing a spot near the inner wall where the curve dipped slightly. Calder left the door unlatched for now. He wanted it to move freely if pressure changed suddenly. The wind returned without warning. It didn't roar at first. It rushed in low and fast, skimming the ground, pulling loose dirt and debris into fast-moving sheets that raced across the rise. Calder felt it press against his back, then slide along the curve of the structure and lift away. The sound followed, a long rising moan that built in layers, overlapping itself until individual gusts became impossible to separate. Thunder cracked closer now, sharper, louder. Lightning split the sky in jagged lines, illuminating the land in brief, unnatural flashes that turned everything stark and colorless. In town, the first structures began to protest. Wood creaked, metal screamed. A loose sign tore free and vanished into the dark. Calder heard a distant crash that could only be a roof giving way. The storm had found its voice. Rain arrived suddenly, driven sideways by the wind. It stung exposed skin and soaked clothing in seconds. Calder moved inside the structure and pulled the door shut. The sound changed immediately. Outside, the storm raged with chaotic violence. Inside, the noise flattened, diffused, transformed into a constant, enveloping pressure. The wind raced around the curved walls, unable to catch, unable to strike cleanly. Calder could feel the structure flex beneath his hand, bending just enough to absorb the force before returning to shape. No sharp jolts, no cracking protest, just movement, controlled and deliberate. Ridge whined once, then pressed his body against Calder's leg. Calder crouched and rested a steady hand on the dog's shoulder. "You're all right," he said. He wasn't speaking to convince Ridge, he was reminding himself. The storm intensified. Thunder rolled almost continuously now, overlapping with the scream of wind. Lightning struck close enough that the air inside the structure vibrated with it. Calder smelled ozone, sharp and metallic. He braced his feet wide, one hand on the wall, the other steadying Ridge. He counted breaths, measured the rhythm of the storm the way he had learned years ago, after another night when the sky had taken something he couldn't replace. Outside, Dodge City was coming apart. Later, survivors would argue about the order of destruction, about what fell first and what held longest. Calder heard only fragments through the chaos, the splintering crack of timber, the hollow boom of something heavy collapsing, the shrill scream of metal torn loose. At one point, the ground itself seemed to shudder, a deep vibration that rattled Calder's teeth and sent Ridge scrambling closer. Morrow screamed. The sound cut through the storm, high and panicked. Calder's chest tightened. He moved toward the door without thinking, then forced himself to stop. He knew better. Leaving the shelter now would help no one. He shouted her name anyway, voice torn away by the wind the moment it left his mouth. He pressed his forehead briefly against the curved wall, feeling the steady resistance beneath his skin. "Hold," he whispered. Whether to the structure or to himself, he didn't know. Time lost its shape. The storm did not pass quickly. It lingered, circling, testing from different angles. The wind changed direction twice, slamming against the structure from the north, then the south, then spiraling upward along the curve. Calder felt each shift, each surge. The structure responded every time, redistributing force, refusing to offer the storm a weak point. The theory he had trusted for years was no longer theory. It was action, consequence, survival. At some point, Ridge stopped shaking. He lay pressed against the wall, breathing hard but steady, eyes open and alert. Calder realized his own breathing had slowed as well. The storm was still dangerous, but it was no longer unknown. Unknown things frightened people. Known things could be endured. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, the wind began to lose its edge. The roar softened to a howl, then to a steady rush, then to a restless murmur. Thunder moved farther away. The rain eased, falling straight down at last. Calder remained where he was, unwilling to trust the quiet too quickly. He waited until the pressure in the air lifted, until the structure stilled beneath his hand. When he finally opened the door, dawn was breaking. The sky was pale and washed clean, streaked with low clouds racing eastward. The air smelled of wet earth and torn vegetation. Calder stepped out slowly. The rise was littered with debris, boards, fragments of fencing, pieces of roof. Morrow stood where he had last seen her, shaken but alive, rope snapped clean but her legs uninjured. Calder reached her in seconds, hands running over her neck, shoulders, legs. She trembled but leaned into his touch. He rested his forehead against hers, relief flooding him so suddenly it left him weak. Beyond the rise, Dodge City lay broken. Several buildings along Main Street had collapsed entirely. Others leaned at dangerous angles, roofs partially torn away, walls split. Edgar Holt's freight yard was a wreck of overturned wagons and scattered crates. The church steeple was gone. The trading post stood, but barely, its front wall bowed inward. Smoke rose from somewhere near the far edge of town, thin and gray. And behind Calder, on the rise, the curved structure stood intact. Its surface was streaked with mud and rain, scarred by flying debris, but whole. The door hung true, the anchors held. The wind had passed around it and moved on. Silas emerged from behind a section of collapsed fencing nearby, blood running from a cut on his scalp. He stared at the structure, then at Calder. "I'll be damned," he said quietly. People began to appear from shelters, from cellars, from wherever they had survived the night. They moved slowly, stunned, eyes drawn again and again to the structure on the rise. Some approached it without speaking, reaching out to touch the curved wall as if to confirm it was real. Calder stood among them, exhausted, soaked, alive. He said, "Nothing." There was nothing left to explain. The wind had already done that for him. Morning did not bring relief so much as clarity. The kind that arrived after something irreversible had already happened. The storm had stripped Dodge City down to its bones, leaving behind a version of the town that felt exposed and unfamiliar. The air was cooler now, washed clean of dust but heavy with the smell of wet wood, torn earth, and smoke. Clouds still moved fast overhead, as if unwilling to linger after what they had done. Calder stood on the rise beside the curved structure, watching people emerge from what shelter they had found. They moved slowly, stiffly, some barefoot, some wrapped in blankets pulled hastily over nightclothes. Faces carried shock more than fear now. Fear had burned itself out during the night. What remained was assessment, counting losses, counting the living. Etta Bloom was among the first to climb the rise. Her dress was plain and dark, hair pulled back as always, though strands had come loose around her face. A shallow cut marked her cheekbone, already drying. She stopped several feet from Calder, eyes traveling from his face to the structure behind him, then back again. "You stayed," she said. "Yes." Her gaze sharpened. "Others didn't have that choice." Calder nodded. "I know." She stepped closer, placing a hand flat against the curved wall. The surface was cool, damp from rain, solid beneath her palm. Her fingers lingered there longer than necessary. "My bakery lost its front wall," she said quietly. "Oven's intact, though. I can still work." She paused. "People will need food." "They will," Calder agreed. Behind her, more townsfolk gathered. Some stared openly at the structure. Others avoided looking at it, as if embarrassed by what it implied. Silas Grady approached, his head wrapped in a rough bandage. Blood had soaked through during the night but had since dried. He walked with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. "Barn roof's gone," Silas said. "Lost 3 stalls, but the horses made it." He glanced at Morrow, standing nearby, calmer now, but still alert. "Yours is a good one." Calder rested a hand on Morrow's neck. "She knows when to listen." Silas's gaze shifted back to the structure. "Town's already talking," he said. "Some calling it luck, others calling it a warning." Calder didn't respond. He had learned there was no value in arguing with grief disguised as certainty. By mid-morning, the rise became a gathering place, not formally, not by decision, but by gravity. People drifted toward the one thing that had not failed. Amos Klein arrived on foot, his beard still matted with rain, eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep. He looked older than he had days earlier, shoulders bowed beneath the weight of what he'd seen. "My place is gone," Amos said, stopping beside Calder. "House and what was left of the barn." His voice was flat, stripped of anger. "Horses didn't make it this time." Calder said nothing. There was nothing. That would make that better. Amos stared at the curved wall, jaw tightening. "This stood." "Yes." Amos let out a slow breath. "I need to understand why." Calder met his gaze. "I can explain how," he said. "The why is harder." Amos nodded once. "Start with how." The first repair efforts began without organization. Men hauled debris aside. Women checked on neighbors. Someone rang the cracked bell from the church ruin to account for survivors. The list grew, slowly, painfully. Names spoken, names unanswered. Near noon, a man Calder did not recognize climbed the rise. He was older, maybe in his late 50s, tall but stooped slightly, with sharp cheekbones and a long, narrow face. His beard was gray and carefully trimmed, his hair thinning but neatly combed back. He wore a dark coat despite the mud, and his boots, though scuffed, had been cleaned recently. His eyes were steady, thoughtful, carrying the weight of long responsibility. This was Reverend Thomas Hale, recently assigned to Dodge City, replacing a predecessor who had left after illness. Hale had been raised in river country farther east and had learned early that faith did not exempt anyone from consequence. The storm had taken the church steeple but left the foundation and cellar intact. Hale had spent the night below ground with 6 others, praying quietly while listening to the world come apart above them. He stopped near Calder and inclined his head. "I wanted to see it for myself," he said. "You're welcome to," Calder replied. Hale walked a slow circle around the structure, one hand resting behind his back, the other occasionally brushing the wall as if reading it by touch. "People are calling this a miracle," he said. Calder watched him carefully. "Are you?" Hale smiled faintly. "I've learned miracles rarely arrive without explanation. That doesn't make them less meaningful." He turned to face Calder. It does, however, make us responsible for what we learn from them. That afternoon, the town council reconvened, not in the trading post, which was no longer safe, but in the open air near the rise. Edgar Holt stood among them, his usual confidence shaken. His freight business had taken heavy losses. Crates lay scattered miles away. He spoke less now, listened more. Henry Caldwell took notes, his spectacles smudged, his hands trembling slightly when he thought no one noticed. Jonah Pierce stood nearby, his one hand clasped around his wrist, gaze fixed on the structure. Calder did not stand apart this time. He stood among them. "We can rebuild what we lost," Edgar said finally. "We always do." Jonah spoke next, voice low but firm. "And if we rebuild the same way, we'll lose it again." Murmurs rippled through the group. Edgar frowned. "You suggesting we all build, this?" He gestured vaguely at the curved structure. "I'm suggesting we stop pretending the land owes us anything," Jonah replied. All eyes turned to Calder. "I'm not asking anyone to change overnight," Calder said. His voice carried easily in the open air. "I'm asking you to look at what happened, not to assign blame, to learn." "And if we don't?" someone asked. Calder met the man's eyes. "Then the wind will teach the lesson again." That evening, Etta opened her bakery using a temporary wall of boards and canvas. The oven held as she'd said it would. The smell of bread spread through the broken streets, drawing people like a promise. Calder helped carry supplies. Ridge lay near the doorway, watching passers-by with quiet vigilance. Children returned first. They always did. They ran up the rise again, touching the structure, asking questions. One boy pressed his ear against the wall and laughed. "It's quiet in there," he said. "Yes," Calder replied. "That's the point." As night approached, lanterns appeared around the rise. People brought blankets, tools, food, not as offerings, as preparation. No one said it out loud, but many stayed close to the structure, unwilling to return to what had failed them. Calder sat on the ground with his back against the curved wall, exhaustion settling into his bones. Ridge lay at his feet. Morrow stood nearby, head lowered, finally calm. Etta approached and sat beside him without asking. "You didn't build this to prove anything," she said. "No." "But it did," she continued. Calder looked out at the broken town, the people moving among ruins and light. "Proof only matters if people are willing to see it." Etta nodded. "They are now." Above them, the sky cleared completely for the first time in days. Stars emerged, sharp and numerous. The wind moved gently across the plains, no longer angry, just present. Calder closed his eyes, not in relief, but in resolve. What stood after the storm was not just wood and metal and curved design. It was a question the town could no longer ignore. The days after the storm did not blur together. Each one arrived with its own weight, its own decisions, its own quiet reckoning. Dodge City did not wake up rebuilt or redeemed. It woke up sore, short on sleep, and painfully aware of what it no longer had. The wind had moved on, but its absence felt temporary, like a pause rather than an ending. Calder rose before sunrise as he always did. The curved structure on the rise had become more than a shelter now. It was a reference point. People oriented themselves by it, spoke of it as if it had always been there. He checked the anchors each morning, not because he expected failure, but because trust without maintenance was how things collapsed. Ridge followed him closely, his limp more noticeable on cold mornings, but his presence steady. The dog had filled out slightly from regular meals, his coat less dull, his eyes sharper. He was no longer a stray. He was a sentinel. Morrow grazed quietly nearby, her nerves settled at last. The storm had taken something out of her, some deep reserve, but it had also proven her instincts sound. Calder brushed her daily now, slower than necessary, using the routine as much for himself as for her. Horses remembered fear differently than men did. They needed repetition to replace it. Rebuilding began without announcement. Silas Grady was the first to ask real questions. Not theoretical ones, not the kind meant to test a man's confidence, but practical ones that assumed answers existed. He brought paper and charcoal one afternoon, sitting on an overturned crate while Calder sketched the basic geometry of the structure in the dirt. Silas watched closely, brow furrowed, hands clasped between his knees. "So the curve carries the load," Silas said, following the line with his finger. "Not the corners." "There are no corners," Calder replied. Silas nodded slowly. That alone feels like the point. By the end of the week, Amos Klein returned, this time with tools and two younger men from his ranch. Amos looked thinner than before, his beard trimmed back as if he'd needed to see his own face clearly again. Grief had not left him, but it had sharpened his focus. He spoke less now, listened more. "I'm not rebuilding the old way," Amos said simply. "Not again." Calder didn't argue. He walked Amos through the structure piece by piece, explaining where flexibility mattered and where rigidity was dangerous. Amos asked few questions, but the ones he did ask cut straight to function. Loss had burned away his patience for anything ornamental. Word spread outward from Dodge City, carried by traders and freight men who had seen the damage firsthand. Not rumors this time, but specifics, measurements, observations. A building that stayed when others failed. Some dismissed it as chance. Others recognized a pattern. One afternoon, a wagon arrived from a neighboring settlement. It was driven by a man named Everett Boone, tall and narrow-shouldered with a palti, long, angular face and a reddish beard that forked at the chin. Boone wore his hair long and tied back, his clothes plain but well kept. He carried himself carefully, as if conserving energy. Years earlier, a barn collapse had crushed his left leg, leaving him with a permanent limp and a habit of planning before moving. He walked the structure slowly, tapping the wall with his knuckles, listening. "Wind slides," he said finally. "Doesn't punch." "Yes," Calder replied. Boone exhaled. "I lost my wife to a storm that shouldn't have reached us," he said, voice flat. "I don't care what it looks like." He turned to Calder. "I care if it works." Calder met his gaze. "Then you already understand it." The town council did not issue decrees or mandates. Dodge City was not built on that kind of authority, but something shifted in their meetings. Conversations moved from whether Calder's structure was acceptable to how aspects of it might be adapted. Rounded roofs, reinforced joints, reduced corners. Compromise took root, slow but undeniable. Etta Bloom became an anchor in a different way. With her bakery running again, she organized meals for those still displaced. She moved through the broken streets with calm efficiency, her presence steadying. She and Calder spoke more often now, usually while working. There was no romance in it yet, only a shared understanding of effort and consequence. Etta did not ask Calder why he knew what he knew. She understood that some knowledge arrived through loss, and she respected silence where it belonged. Children gathered at the rise each afternoon. Calder found himself answering questions he hadn't planned to. Why was the door round? Why didn't the wall lean? Why did it feel quieter inside? He answered simply, never talking down. Children understood more than adults expected, especially when the truth was physical. Ridge took on a new role without instruction. He patrolled the edge of the rise, alert but not aggressive, barking once when strangers approached, then waiting for Calder's signal. People joked that the structure had a guard now. Calder didn't correct them. Every working place needed one. One evening, Reverend Hale visited again. He stood beside Calder as the sun dipped low, painting the damaged town in amber light. "I've been thinking," Hale said, "about how people talk about faith." Calder waited. "They say faith is believing without seeing," Hale continued, "but I've seen belief built on evidence too. You built this because you believed the land would repeat itself." Calder considered that. "I built it because the land already had." Hale smiled. "That might be the same thing." The first new structure began a week later, not Calder's, but Silas's. It was smaller, simpler, a storage building rather than a home. Its walls curved gently, not fully round, but enough to redirect force. Men gathered to watch, some skeptical, some hopeful. No one laughed. Calder helped where asked and stepped back where he wasn't. He refused to become a foreman or prophet. This wasn't about followers. It was about survival becoming communal rather than accidental. That night, as lanterns flickered across the rise, Etta sat beside Calder again. "You know they'll never go back entirely," she said. "To square corners?" Calder asked. She nodded. "That's all right," he replied. "They don't have to abandon everything. They just have to stop pretending change is weakness." Etta studied him, then smiled faintly. "You're staying, aren't you?" Calder looked out at the town, scarred, rebuilding, learning. He thought of the road he'd ridden in on, the wind at his back, the losses he carried quietly. Yes, he said. I think I am. Above them, the wind moved gently through the grass, no longer angry, no longer ignored. Dodge City did not look safe yet, but it looked awake, and for the first time, that felt like enough. Summer arrived without ceremony, the way it always did on the plains. One week the morning still carried a trace of chill, the next the sun rose heavy and insistent, pressing heat into the ground until the air shimmered. Dodge City no longer looked like a town waiting to be erased, it looked like a place in motion. Scars remained, empty lots where buildings once stood, patched walls, roofs still unfinished, but there was purpose now, where there had once been only recovery. The town had learned the difference. Calder Wren no longer woke to silence alone. Hammers rang out at dawn, voices carried across the streets, wagons moved with intention rather than urgency. The curved structure on the rise remained the heart of it all, not as a shrine or symbol, but as a working place. People came to it for plans, for discussion, for quiet when the noise of rebuilding grew too loud. Calder stood inside the structure early one morning, adjusting a joint on a new interior brace. The space had changed. Tools lined the wall. Chalk markings covered sections of the curved surface, measurements, angles, notes left by different hands. It smelled of wood, oil, and dust warmed by sun. Ridge lay near the entrance, older now in the way dogs aged quickly when they finally stopped wandering. His coat had filled in, though the limp remained. He lifted his head when Calder moved, then settled again, content to guard a place that no longer needed guarding quite so fiercely. Morrow grazed outside, her movements slower than they had been in spring. Calder had noticed the stiffness creeping deeper into her joints, the way she favored her hind leg after long days. She was nearing the end of her working life. Calder accepted that with the same calm he accepted weather. Nothing built to last did so forever. What mattered was knowing when to change how you used it. Silas Grady's first curved storage building stood finished now. It wasn't elegant, but it was solid. The walls bowed gently, the roof rounded just enough to shed wind instead of catching it. Silas ran a hand along it every morning like a man still surprised by his own survival. "Never thought I'd build something without corners," he told Calder one afternoon. "Feels like learning to write with the other hand." "And yet," Calder replied, "you're still writing." Amos Klein's ranch took longer. He insisted on doing much of the work himself, despite offers of help. Loss had made him protective of effort. The new barn rose slowly, its curved supports larger and heavier than Calder would have chosen, but Amos needed that reassurance. Calder let him learn through doing. When the structure finally stood, Amos said little. He walked inside, stood still, then nodded once. It was enough. Visitors continued to arrive, though fewer now. Word had spread, but novelty had faded into practicality. One such visitor arrived late in the season, a woman traveling alone with a mule-drawn cart. Her name was Clara Whitlock. She was in her early 30s, broad-shouldered, with sun-browned skin and hair cut short for ease. A faint burn scar ran along her forearm, the result of a fire, years earlier, that had taken her family's home. She spoke plainly, asked direct questions, and listened closely. "I don't care what it looks like," she told Calder. "I care if it gives me time." Calder understood immediately. He walked her through the structure, explaining choices, not selling promises. Clara stayed 3 days, helped where she could, then left with sketches copied carefully into her own notebook. She shook Calder's hand before going. "You didn't save this town," she said. "You reminded it to pay attention." Etta Bloom's bakery became more than a place for bread. It became a meeting point, a marker of normalcy returning. The front wall had been rebuilt with a gentle curve, subtle but deliberate. Most people didn't notice it consciously, but they felt it. The space held warmth differently. Sound settled instead of bouncing back sharply. Etta noticed everything. One evening, after the ovens were shut down and the last loaf sold, she walked with Calder up the rise. The sky was clear, stars already visible, the wind soft and unhurried. "You've changed the way this town builds," she said. Calder shook his head. "The town changed itself." "You gave it a reason." He considered that. "Maybe." They stood quietly for a moment. Ridge padded ahead of them, sniffing at the grass, then circled back. Morrow lifted her head, ears flicking toward a distant sound that never came. Etta spoke again. "I've been thinking about expanding the bakery, a small addition, storage, maybe a place for people to sit." Calder smiled faintly. "Round walls?" Etta returned the smile. Of course. The first real test after the storm came in late August. The sky darkened one afternoon, clouds rolling in fast and low. People noticed immediately this time. No one laughed, no one waited. Doors were secured. Tools were put away. Several families moved toward the rise without being told, settling near the curved structures that now dotted the edge of town. The wind came, strong but not violent. It pushed, tested, moved on. The new buildings flexed and held. The old ones protested less than they once had, reinforced, adapted. When the wind passed, the town remained intact. No cheers followed, just nods, confirmation. That night, Calder sat inside the original structure, lantern low, notebook open. He added a final page, not diagrams, not measurements, but names. Silas, Amos, Etta, Ridge, Dodge City, places where the lesson had taken root. He closed the notebook and set it aside. Reverend Hale visited one last time before his reassignment. He stood with Calder near the doorway, watching the town settle into evening. People ask me where God was during the storm, Hale said. And what do you tell them? Calder asked. That he was where? He always is, Hale replied, in the choices people make when they know better. When winter came again, it did so without incident. Snow fell evenly. Wind passed over rooftops instead of tearing at them. Fires burned efficiently in spaces designed to hold warmth rather than trap it. Dodge City was not immune to hardship, but it was no longer naive. Calder stayed. He took on apprentices, not formally, not with titles. Men and women came to him with questions, left with understanding. He charged little, asked only that they respect the land they built on. Morrow retired to lighter work, then to rest. Ridge aged into a fixture, sleeping more, watching less, content. Years later, travelers would ask why the buildings near the rise were shaped the way they were. The answers varied. Some spoke of a storm, some of a man who listened more than he talked. Some said the wind had taught the town a lesson it never forgot. Calder preferred a simpler explanation. Corners give the wind something to fight, he would say. And the wind always wins a fight, better to give it away through. Dodge City did. And the wind, finding nothing left to argue with, passed by. Sometimes, God does not arrive as thunder. He arrives as understanding, as patience, as a quiet man who chooses to build differently when everyone else repeats what has already failed. The miracle in this story was not that the wind stopped. It didn't. The miracle was that someone listened before the storm came, that someone believed protection could look gentle instead of strong, curved instead of sharp, humble instead of proud. In our own lives, storms will come too. Illness, loss, loneliness, fear. God does not always remove them, but He often gives us wisdom, kindness, and one safe place to stand when everything else is shaking. If this story reminded you that you are not forgotten, that preparation is faith, and that love can be built quietly, then this story was for you. Please share it with someone who needs hope tonight. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We read every one. And if you believe that no child, no animal, and no soul should face the storm alone, subscribe to this channel so we can keep telling stories that heal. May God bless you. May He protect your home, your loved ones, and your heart. And may you always find a place that still stands when the wind passes by.